I think that everything got sealed and frozen in cement when the lawsuit was filed, and it wouldn't be all that hard for Brian Flores' lawyers to paint anything that happens in the balance of this cycle as a reaction to the lawsuit, as an effort to do the cleanup on aisle 5 after these allegations are made. And I thought last night, from a strategic standpoint, it may have been better for Brian Flores to wait until this cycle was over. He's not facing any statute of limitations. This is all fresh. He's got plenty of time. Let's wait and see what happens with these next 5 jobs. In a roundabout way, he may have been doing some of the other coaches a favor, because to the extent that there is a reaction from a PR standpoint that results in 1 or 2 or 3 black coaches getting these jobs, the fact that he filed his lawsuit may have been a big factor in nudging teams in that direction.
I mean, I hope it is. I'd love to see Patrick Graham get an opportunity. And Mike, one of the things about the NFL coach hiring process, even though, and good for the NFL, it's been more deliberate this year. People have taken their time. I've given the stats on this show a couple of times about how basically teams waited longer than they ever have after the end of the regular season to begin the hiring process. But I also think that the one other flaw in the hiring process is always being concerned with winning the press conference. And maybe thinking that, and I'm going to give this as an example, not that it was a flawed process. I don't know what the process was. I just know what has been released by the team and the coaches involved. And now we'll see, because Brian Flores has implied that the fix was in on this. But the New York Giants process resulted in Brian Daboll getting a head coaching job. And look, again, I do not mean this with any criticism toward Daboll. But the fact is that NFL teams, time after time, year after year, do the same thing. They hire coordinators from teams that have just had a great year. Is that the only place that coaches are good? Is that the only pool that we're considering? Personally, I was happiest of all the coaches in this process. I was happiest to hear that Patrick Graham, the defensive coordinator of the Giants, who is black, had a 9-hour session this week in the offices of the Minnesota Vikings, his second interview with the Vikings. He met everybody in the organization. Mike, they did a mock press conference with Patrick Graham, asking him everything. What's wrong with this team? What's wrong with... So they obviously vetted Patrick Graham so well. And the only reason I say this is that Patrick Graham is a coach on a team that has been awful for several years. Obviously, the Giants last won a playoff game 10 years ago this week. And so, the Giants have totally been in a hole. And yet the defensive coordinator for that team, perhaps because the Vikings were originally looking to satisfy the Rooney Rule. I don't know why he was offered a chance to enter. But the Vikings obviously saw some things, seemingly anyway, I should say not obviously, seemingly saw some things they liked. And Patrick Graham, who is black, basically goes in there and apparently wows everybody. And everybody looks around and say, boy, how about this Patrick Graham? But it just goes to show that, to me, should have a totally, totally open process and not just think, hey, let's talk to the coaches of the teams that were really good this year. It's always been that way, and I always wonder why. I shouldn't wonder why, because teams want to win the press conference a day or 2 or 3 after they make the hire.
Well, if they really wanted to win the press conference, this gets back to something we've been saying the last 2 days. They wouldn't have them show up in business suits for the press conference. They'd let them wear what they wear on the sidelines and be comfortable and speak the way that they ordinarily will during the press conferences that we see during the season. Peter, the cynical view of this year's hiring process is that in the absence of a superstar for which there was a land rush by multiple teams to hire, that what teams decided to do was deliberately go slowly, but ultimately hire whoever they want to hire anyway, and not give the black candidates any greater consideration than they otherwise would in the name of having greater representation among the broader coaching pool of black coaches. And there is a greater sensitivity now to taking your time, but this is the disconnect the NFL has faced for 20 years since the Rooney Rule was put in place. You can't force these teams to hire black coaches. You can just compel them to not rush in and hire the guy that they want to hire. And before this process started, it was estimated to me that 70 to 80% of these jobs, when they're open, the owner knows who's going to be hired. This year, I feel like none of the owners had a predetermination as to who they wanted. So that's progress. But at the end of the day, and to get back to what Troy Vincent told you, they can only do so much. At the end of the day, the owners of these teams, the oligarchs, the monarchs who own these teams, and this is one of the most fascinating dynamics of the NFL for me, billion-dollar football operations run by families who pass the equity from generation to generation, sibling to sibling, really rich, really powerful people who aren't used to being told what to do and what not to do and do what they want to do whenever they want and however they want. And they're all white, mostly white, and they're more comfortable with people who look like them. That's been the big argument for all these years. It's one of the reasons why there need to be black owners in the NFL. The problem is these values of franchises are skyrocketing. It's harder for anyone to come up with the money to buy one of these teams. Maybe it'll happen in Denver. Maybe it won't. But you've got people calling the shots who don't like to be told no and are willing to thumb their nose at what may be a protracted and troubling and expensive legal process, because at the end of the day, I'm going to do what I want to do. That's the factor that has created and allowed this mess to continue.
And Mike, I think the other part of this whole equation that really needs to see the light of day is how many qualified black candidates over the last X number of years, are presented and do interviews for these jobs. And there's never any real explanation about why they didn't get the job. There's never any real explanation about why Jim Caldwell is fired after his last year in Detroit. For having how can you have a winning record with the Detroit Lions? I mean, it's almost unheard of. Jim Caldwell did, and there are so many candidates who right now the frustration seeping out of them, crying coaches. And these coaches who reach out to Troy Vincent and who basically just want him to do something, anything. I think all of those coaches have to be cheering from the sidelines today. And I'm sure that all of the coaches who read this lawsuit, all of the black coaches who read this lawsuit are basically, you go, Flores, because they've been waiting for this moment for, as Flores has accused the NFL, for the hands caught in the cookie jar. And we'll see if these charges can be proven in a court of law. But Brian Flores has a lot of people cheering for him, rooting for him right now.
Well, and, Peter, they can do more than root. Do we have the statement from Brian Flores that was issued yesterday? I think I'm pulling it up here on my... Okay, let's take a look at what he said. And here it is. In making the decision to file the class action complaint today, I understand that I may be risking coaching the game that I love and that has done so much for my family and me. My sincere hope is that by standing up against systemic racism in the NFL, others will join me to ensure that positive change is made for generations to come. Others will join me. Peter, there's an opportunity for coaches out there to do more than cheer for Brian Flores. There is strength in numbers.
Yeah.
Well, hey, you can't blackball every black coach. If every black coach who's been overlooked decides to join in this litigation, put their name on the style of the case. And I understand it's a lot to ask for. And I understand that that's an individual decision that every coach is going to have to make. But if all of a sudden it becomes Brian Flores plus Eric Bieniemy, plus Jim Caldwell, plus Raheem Morris, plus Patrick Graham if he doesn't get one of these jobs. There's a certain point where the snowball becomes so big that the NFL just has to get out of the way. And when I saw that language from Brian Flores the first time, I thought, he's not just hoping for cheerleaders. He's hoping for partners in this, and we'll see if he gets any.
I think you're absolutely right, Mike. They can't blackball every black coach. And I do think that there are probably quite a few black coaches this morning who are thinking, what should I say? What should I do? Because if you're, for instance, a bright, young, rising black coach in the business, let's take Aaron Glenn, the defensive coordinator of the Detroit Lions, who, is very widely respected. He's a Parcells acolyte. And he is a guy, he's going to get interviewed in New Orleans if he hasn't already been interviewed. I do think that if one of these coaches basically comes out and says that about Brian Flores, to me, it will not only strengthen Brian Flores' case, but it will just basically say, we're mad as hell, we're not going to take it anymore, and you go Flores.
The other thing that I need to mention that will hover over the early stages of this case, it's one of the defenses that the NFL has already raised in the lawsuit that was filed in November by John Gruden, and that is the notion that the contract signed by Brian Flores with the Dolphins in early 2019 contains standard language compelling him to bring any and all claims that he may have against the Dolphins or the National Football League or anyone else falling under Big Shield to arbitration. That is the move, and this has become very popular over the last 20 years. Big companies want, for a variety of reasons, to force cases into arbitration. When you go to arbitration, you don't have to deal with a jury that may react, like normal human beings would to evidence that makes people say, I can't believe they did that, I can't believe they said that. They want it to come down to one lawyer, or sometimes you've got more than one lawyer that resolves these cases in arbitration. It's far more objective and dispassionate. You don't have to worry about a runaway arbitration outcome. They like it for that reason. They also like it because what occurs is it all happens in private. You don't have an open court session at the end of the day. And look, the lawyers who represent organizations like the NFL will insist on protective orders and other documentation and commitments that will keep information quiet and private and secret. It's a lot easier to pull that off in arbitration. And in arbitration, if you ultimately have a hearing, it doesn't happen in an open courtroom where people can go in and sit and watch and listen and report on what occurs. So fight number one will be the motion to compel arbitration, which undoubtedly is coming from Brian Flores, and we'll see how that plays out for him and for the league. And from Mike, our perspective,
let me ask you this.
Go ahead.
Let me ask you this as somebody who is very, very familiar with this arena. Which side do you think would ultimately benefit from arbitration?
It's always the company. It's always the business. That's why it's in the contract. If the NFL didn't benefit from arbitration, there would not be in every head coaching contract, in every GM contract, in every assistant coach contract, an arbitration clause. And all of those arbitration clauses, and this is where it becomes even nuttier, they specify that the arbitrator won't be someone on the outside. It will be the commissioner or his designee. And maybe this case, maybe the pushback against the effort to force the Brian Flores litigation into arbitration will include an attack on the inherent conflict of interest that the commissioner has in a situation like this. But it's always the company. I fought this when I was practicing law, the final 10 years that I did it, and I was exclusively representing individuals. The company always wants to find a way to force it into arbitration because David has a much better chance at beating Goliath when a jury of Davids is deciding the case. And Goliath wants nothing more than to avoid a jury full of Davids.
Well, you think then there is practically zero chance that Flores would agree to have this case sent to arbitration?
No, he'll fight it. He'll fight it tooth and nail. He'll absolutely fight it. Yeah. Now, if the NFL were to offer, and I still think he would fight it, if they were to say, well, we'll use an outside arbitrator, somebody who's truly independent, who has no ties to the NFL, who has no tentacles back to the NFL, that would be a potential compromise. But I think Flores should stand firm and insist on a process that will result in as much light as possible shining on this. And that's what I was starting to say earlier. From our perspective, sorry, NFL, I want this all in court. I want this all to play out. I want the dirty laundry hanging from the line because it's not just the potential for a massive verdict that is going to get the NFL to finally change. It is the fact that when you pull this crap, it's going to be exposed. You can't just hide it in an arbitration setting where no one's going to have access. That's what happened with Colin Kaepernick. His case went to arbitration. What did we ever see from the deposition transcripts there? Because part of the deal was when they paid him roughly $10 million, and that's become the accepted figure, everything got wiped away. Everything got expunged. Everything is gone. That was one of the requirements of the St. Louis settlement, $790 million. In exchange, everything gets disintegrated. Everything gets burned. These things never come to light. That's why they settle the concussion cases. The value to the NFL early on, never having to testify in open court what was known and when they knew it about the long-term risks of head trauma. So the process gets used to conceal the truth, and we want the truth to come out. That's what we do, Peter. We try to pursue the truth. And the only way the truth is going to come out for Brian Flores and the case that he's trying to make is if it happens in an open courtroom. And whether he wins or whether he loses, I hope he gets his day in court. Not in the court of Roger Goodell, but in the court of the Southern District of New York, federal court, open access. We all get to sit there if we want, space permitting, and hear exactly what the evidence is.
I couldn't agree with you more, Mike. To me, another settlement in this case without the facts ever being heard. Can you imagine if the accusations he has made in this lawsuit, I think particularly against Stephen Ross and the Miami Dolphins, just imagine if they're left hanging out there with Ross and the Dolphins adamantly denying them. This has to be answered. We need to know the truth of this. A Miami Dolphins fan has to know if his owner, if the owner of the team that so many people love did what Flores has accused him of doing. And if so, he can't be an owner in the NFL anymore.
Hi, I'm Mike Tirico, and thanks for watching. Make sure to hit subscribe for the latest news and highlights from NBC Sports.